Hello everybody, my name is Michael, and this is The Natural One. And today, we're going to be talking about building your world and the exact methods and mechanics of how to do so. Today, we're opening up the new part of our channel, World Builder. Let's talk about that. When you first start writing your world, you have one very, very important question to ask yourself. What is the magic system in this world? And will it be high magic or low magic? Many of you are probably looking at me skeptically, wondering what exactly is high magic and low magic. I mean, you've probably heard it thrown vaguely around here and there, but there's really been no definition of it, even if you look online. And I'll admit, there is none. Or none that I know of. It's usually generalizations. But for today's video, it is going to be quite important, and we'll be using the term high magic, low magic, and even medium magic to fit in general categories of worlds that you can run into. But first, why is this important? The magic system of your world will define how the players will be in that world. It'll define what the races are like in your world, how they react to seeing certain races. It'll even define how your gods act in your world, which honestly I think is a very important part. Perhaps it also will define how monsters came to be, how many monsters there are, how powerful is magic exactly in your world, what is the history of magic, and so much more. As I said before, we have two main classifications of magic and a mix between. We have high magic and low magic. Let's begin with high magic. Magic in these worlds are either very, very common or very, very powerful. A good example of this sort of world would be World of Warcraft, where we see very, very almost over-the-top uses of magic. We see airships going through the air. We see strange inventions made by dwarves. We see magic that is almost apocalyptic levels, and gods constantly working their way in that world. Another example of this sort of high magic world is Warhammer Fantasy, or Age of Sigmar, which is an ultra-high magic world, where literally the gods are going to war alongside you. These worlds are not very common in RPGs from what I've seen, though I have played in one or two of them, and they can be quite a bit of fun, especially as a mage or a fighter. Magical items are usually plentiful in this world, and religion? Whew! Religion is very common and is taken very seriously, as it should if gods do, in fact, meddle in your world quite often, even sending avatars constantly, or paladins that embody the god, or work as his vessel on Earth. These worlds, although hard to work with, due to the power creep that tends to follow with the party having tons of magical items, or the usual constant use of magic by so many players, it does produce a lot of fun. And it produces a very interesting world. If you're planning on making that sort of story, where the gods are a very big part, or high magics, such as world-ending spells, or some sort of dimension jumping, that's also very common in these high magic settings, it might be a good place to start. Maybe not to end, as it can be a bit boring after a while to have all the magical items, in my opinion, or to be constantly bombarded with magical items, as it often does force the barbarians, unfortunately, to be a bit underpowered when everybody tends to have magical spells and such, but it can be a good deal of fun. Next, we go on to low magic. So, what is a low magic world, per se? Well, a good example of this would be the Game of Thrones universe, or even, in some degrees, the Lord of the Rings. How can those be? Both seem quite different worlds, and indeed they are, but the magic system is very similar. Yes, magic exists in both worlds, but to many people, the magic is usually quite rare. You don't see elves running around casting spells. You don't see orcs or anything like that, or even humans, for that matter, having any sort of magical power. There might be a few enchanted items here and there, but those are rare, and often legendary. Those that do have magic are considered rare, and influential and powerful. In these sort of worlds, you often will see what mages do exist are revered and often sought after by lords and kings. And that makes a very different, how should I put it, feel for when you're playing a mage, and should be emphasized if you ever run one of these low magic systems. Additionally, in a low magic system, usually we get to see something a bit more gritty. Something like The Witcher is another good example, where we usually see the more realistic side. I know I quoted Lord of the Rings earlier, but that's just an opinion of mine, more than anything. Most official low magic systems tend to have a bit more of a gritty feel to it, tending to focus on the more human aspect, as mages tower above as these powerful political figures. In these worlds, we also see that religion tends to be quite pushed back. The gods don't tend to interfere in these worlds. They tend to be more passive than anything. Perhaps there are tales of when the gods walked the earth, or how they created the world, but it is very rare to see them interact with your world. It is even rarer still to see them bring avatars into this world, or to do these miracles. If there's clerics or any sort of cleric-like magic in your world, again, it is revered and highly sought after. I have spoken of the extremes, and do I recommend either of them? Depends on the game you want to run. But for most beginners, I recommend a mixture of the two. The medium magic system. Yeah, that sounds pretty bad. Kind of why I didn't put that in the video earlier, but shh. Medium magic is more commonly known as general magic systems that you see in your video games and the typical game of D&D. Magic is known of. Magic is actually even taught at colleges in some cases. A good example of a medium magic system that you might all know is Skyrim. You don't see everybody running around with enchanted blades, and you don't see too many of the elder races. Unlike in low magic, where if there are any elder races, they're basically legend. If you find an elf in one of those low magic systems, whew, that is a surprise. But in medium magic, it's common enough to find an elf, or a dwarf, or a gnome. They even live with humans in some cases. Though not in the massive settlements that we see typically in the high magic systems, where we see towering cities filled with different districts of different races. In medium magic, we tend to have a bit more balance. The average peasant might not see a mage, but if you go into town sometime, or a city, you'll run into a mage or two, and who knows? You might even recover some very powerful magic similar to high magic systems if you go to the right places in these worlds. Gods can go either way, and it's kind of why I recommend most beginners stick with this medium magic. Few people really think about what gods mean in these worlds and what they can do. Most of us, when we start our games, don't consider the religious implications. I know I didn't. And I made a few fumbles in my medium magic world because I started adding too much power to these gods. Or in some cases, I would make them too distant, making it feel that the players had no reason to communicate with these higher powers. Play that part very carefully. So, with these three magic systems in mind, and very, very basic summaries of each, I hope this at least gives you an idea of where to start in your world. Because the magic in your world is going to be very important in how it is built. It'll dictate how common magic is. It'll dictate how important the gods are. It'll dictate how common races are. It'll dictate, even in some cases, how common racism, or even how common weapons and armor are, or even how gritty your world will be. Keep these in mind, and if you can figure out your magic system long before you start crafting your great ancient civilization of elves, of dwarves, long before you tell the story of how you're going to figure out how the monsters of your world came to be, it'll make the world just that bit more believable, and that much better for the players to immerse themselves in. Like the video? Why don't you try subscribing and thumbs up? Also share it. I know that my channel isn't exactly the most important or best seen. I still got a ways to go, and every bit counts and helps. Either way, if you do or don't, your support is appreciated. My name is Michael. Thanks for watching. See you in the next time.